Time for the first Cartoon Network series of the year, and about time too. I don't know which of the big three TV animation studios I'd call my favorite, but I've come to adore Cartoon Network's body of work. Even in shows I don't like, there's always passion, humor, and ingenuity. But I gotta repent for not watching these shows enough as a kid compared to Nick and Disney's output, and see the good in shows I've brushed off for the longest time. The one I think I've brushed off the hardest, the one I never found the joke with, is a pretty easy one to do that with: The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. This is a show that prides itself on being scary, dumb, and gross. I wasn't a horror kid and was growing out of dumb and gross stuff by the time I regularly tuned into Cartoon Network, so I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've always felt bad that I could never say I liked it. It looked easy on the eyes, had characters I could never forget, and I missed out on the best jokes it seems. Their internet presence is enough to make me mad I might have just seen the wrong episodes. So I was mixed heading into the Grim Adventures, expecting it to be better than I remember, but also bracing for the annoying stuff. You'll be happy to know the annoying stuff was even more annoying, but the good stuff was an amazing surprise. I missed out on something. So, hopefully going back to the beginning can paint a clearer picture of what they went through. The creator of this show is Adam Maxwell Burtons, aka Maxwell Adams, who got his start in animation after graduating the University of the Arts in Philadelphia in 1995. One of his student films involved a boy in a baseball cap and striped shirt and a girl with pigtails, all about trepanation, ending with the girl drilling a hole in the boy's head. It's a creepy but funny short with a shocking violent swerve. I mean, good gravy, what's she gonna do next? Knock him to the curb and get his hands run over? He was one of many artists in this time who worked many kinds of jobs at many kinds of places, but was most notable for providing stories and storyboards for Cartoon Network's Cow and Chicken and I Am Weasel. I'm already connecting some pieces. In 1999, he was inspired to bring his boy and girl characters back in a somewhat major production, a new pilot for the Cartoon Show, sticking with the morbid tone of the student film, but dialed way back to appeal to kids, of course. This short, Meet the Reaper, got a sneak preview on December 27th, 1999, being shown in the next year's Big Pick event on June 9th, 2000. It was one of that season's 3 winners alongside Sheep in the Big City and Whatever Happened to Robot Jones, but Billy, Mandy, and their grim adventures seem to remain a work in progress for a few years. They premiered on August 24th, 2001, sorta. The show Grim and Evil featured the Grim Adventures as a segment alongside another Maxwell Adams cartoon, Evil Con Carne. I won't cover that show in detail yet, but I wanted to offer you your first taste of how cuckoo this show's seasons are. Grim and Evil ran for 2 seasons in the US, ending on October 18th, 2002, before Cartoon Network thought these shows were better off separate. They were half right. Season 1 of The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy as its own show premiered on June 13th, 2003. But these 10 episodes were only branded as Season 1 domestically. They were still produced as part of a 3rd season for Grim and Evil, hence why they kept the 3x7 format and some of the earlier animation habits. But then you have fans who considered the original Grim and Evil run as a whole Season 1, and Season 1 of Billy and Mandy to be Season 2. So is the summer 2004 run of episodes Season 4 since it's the 4th production block, Season 3 counting Grim and Evil as one pro-show season, Season 2 lumping Grim and Evil and the 2003 run together as Season 1, or Season 1 of Billy and Mandy as a proper show?
I can't stop the confusion in my mind!
For simplicity's sake, and I'm stretching the meaning of those 3 words, I'll go with the Season 2 option, since the original Grim and Evil episodes were quickly repackaged and treated like Season 1 episodes. Still, shouldn't be this complicated. You're probably wondering why I don't consider Grim and Evil its own thing or a Season 0 like the early Fairly OddParents episodes on Oh Yeah Cartoons. Well, because those are easier to label as prototypical, they have a slightly different art style and continuity, while Billy and Mandy is clearly following on from Grim and Evil, down to having the same characters presented the same way. Did you like that headache? Good, because we're over the worst of it. Billy and Mandy was a popular enough setup for Cartoon Network to keep around nearly as long as Dexter's Lab and the Powerpuff Girls. 6 seasons, wrapping up on November 9th, 2007, with one final spin-off pilot the following October, Underfist. In fact, it became their longest running show by episode count until 2014, getting 79 half hours, a crossover with Codename Kids Next Door, and multiple TV movies. It managed to be a big part of two historic eras for the network, the formative cartoon era and the more wacky and childish mid-2000s era, influenced by one and influenced on the other. That's the best way of describing their place in Cartoon Network history.
Aren't you too scared? Boo blah! Oh, come on. I'm a walking skeleton. Isn't that scary?
Once upon a time, a really stupid boy named Billy had a hamster called Mr. Snuggles. When it turned 10, the Grim Reaper came to take it away, but Billy and his friend Mandy weren't ready to say goodbye to their furry friend just yet. So they bet on his life with a game of limbo held in limbo, but through shenanigans, the Grim Reaper ends up losing and has to be friends with Billy and Mandy until the end of time. Comparing this to the Fairly OddParents once again, this is like a darker, meaner shadow of that show's setup. Average kids meeting the world of the supernatural and basically becoming family with it. Only in this show, it's made pretty clear that Grimm is absolutely miserable being tied down to them and forced to serve them. But they can still get a black comedy rapport out of them and their associates in the city of Innsville. Grimm has made the show good to me. I officially like the show because of him. Despite his misery, Greg Eagles puts so much charm into his performance. It's a delight, and really something when he gets to show his dark sense of humor. He can let kids literally laugh in the face of death. Billy is the biggest reason I didn't like this show as a kid. He was too loud, stupid, and annoying for me. But remember when I said I probably just watched the wrong episodes? I thought he could be pretty funny as long as the world could play off him instead of getting defeated by his energy, and it's pretty often they get that right. Mandy is thankfully way more reserved, being quiet but ruthlessly unhappy. She rarely ever smiles. Don't let the later seasons lie to you, it happens. And only seems to get satisfaction from watching Grimm and Billy suffer. However, she does care about them once in a while, and provides a voice of reason when the situation gets too odd. Instead of giving you a sympathetic, optimistic, and reasonable main character, they split those character traits amongst a trio, giving them plenty of shining moments, but also plenty of flaws warranted for a dark comedy such as this. As for the earliest secondary characters to be introduced, Gladys and Harold are Billy's parents. Harold starts out slightly competent, but eventually just turns into a grown-up Billy. Nothing wrong with either take, but the evolution is noticeable. Gladys is emotionally frail, having to raise Billy for 10 years will do that to you, but given how, the very first cartoon to ever feature him had him get his head drilled out, and the next thing you know, death surrounds him, is it fair to say that student films the real world and the show was just Gladys's brain trying to cope with the fact that her son's dying or had a near-death experience that's taken a toll on her sanity? Mandy's parents aren't as interesting. They're always scared that they simply can't control their daughter. That's only getting laughs out of me a few times. Owen is Billy's second best friend, and he starts out as just the black sidekick, being pretty nerdy and saying yo a lot. That never changes, but he gets thrust into more situations, eventually becoming a very important part of the lore, with it explained that he's an inherently supernatural being. It'll all make sense soon, trust me. Nurgle is this show's interpretation of the devil, a businessman. It fits. At least he's never a success at anything he does. He was originally voiced by David Warner, but then replaced by— ooh, he was on Doctor Who! In Season 1C, they were nice enough to give him a family, a wife Sis, who happens to be Billy's aunt, and Junior, a shy kid with satanic powers. Nurgle Jr. would have to be my favorite character. He's the best example of the dark and weird tone they were going for, but contrast the cynically silly world around him by just being a lonely, well-meaning kid who happens to have demonic capabilities. And that's a high honor because we're only getting started with the secondary characters. Mindy is the school's snobbish, popular girl, and Mandy's worst friend. She's voiced by Seth MacFarlane's sister, Rachel MacFarlane, who also just so happened to write her debut. I like the idea that Rachel was entirely behind creating this character solely to annoy Mandy. That alone made her funnier to me. Their school also has a bully called Spurg. Before you say anything about the name, note Maxwell Adams revealed he had Asperger's in 2021, but had been diagnosed after the show was finished. I doubt any offense was intended. He's just the bully with a cowardly side you've seen 100 times before. There's also Puddin, the sweet and sheltered kid who has no luck to speak of. I don't know about him, I'd stick with Junior. Miss Butterbean is their teacher. She's out of it, and that's funny sometimes. As for supernatural entities, Jeff is a giant spider Billy hatched, so he thinks Billy's his father. The problem is, Billy's deathly afraid of spiders. It's the only thing that consistently scares him. His reactions to Jeff can get annoying, but I love how casual and understanding Jeff is of the situation. Eris is the god of chaos. She's like Discord from MLP, but good, because they never try to make her a good guy. You can always count on her to be cheeky and deceptive. Hostelgado is what happens when you turn the narrator for every action movie trailer into a physical being, and he's got a lot of uses as an exterminator of supernatural beings. Not that he's the most competent, but how else do you expect to get stories out of him? And remember how Billy had a pet hamster in the pilot? Well, he was split into two pet characters, Billy's cat Milkshakes and Mandy's dog Saliva. They usually only pop up when there's a need for a pet episode, but that's a good thing, they don't feel overexposed. And lastly, for now, there's Nigel Planter, a teenage wizard who serves as a parody of one of the biggest pop culture franchises of the 2000s, Harry Potter. This was back when you had to put effort into finding things about the series to mock, and effort they put. They scrutinize how screwed up the magic school is, turned the villain's name from a taboo into a slapstick-inducing curse, and somehow even predicted making the headmaster gay for no reason. As someone who grew up on the movies rather than the books, there's probably more nonsense I'm missing, but this was a nice blast of the past, and a good way to round out the original cast.
Your mother has a job and is a respected member of the community.
No one talks about my mother that way!
Just because I consider the collective Grim and Evil production run to be season 1, that doesn't mean there are no differences between each block. Since there were 3 seasons intended for Grim and Evil, this means this period goes through 3 phases. Season 1A is notable for its introductory quality, even after the pilot. The point of an episode is usually either to introduce Grimm to something or someone from Ennsville, or for him to introduce something from the supernatural realm to Billy and Mandy. This was nothing less than warranted for such an open concept. They quickly proved that the concept wasn't the only thing to tune in for. You've got a rival for Grimm, a new otherworldly concept once in a while, and Girl Scout misadventures. Okay, they never bring up the Scouts again. Season 1B is a visual improvement first of all. It no longer looks old and fuzzy, and the designs have gotten some tune-ups to make them more rounded and expressive. But it's not looks I care about at this point in the review, it's writing, and this is a far better written run. They were more apt to include horror in these episodes rather than just a couple off-color jokes, which helped dramatically in making it distinct from most other comedy cartoons. You'll get a horror episode of SpongeBob once in a while, but for Billy and Mandy, it's all the while. It was smart of me to save reviewing this show until after covering its contemporaries, Courage the Cowardly Dog and Invader Zim. I can better appreciate the darker tone the show employed in this era, much more than I ever did the comedy, which can be great, no doubt, but back here it's got the right dressing. And Season 1C would be my favorite run, fully formed and ready to fly on its own, but still designed to be a dramatic show with clearly horrific inspirations. The main trio changed very little across Grim and Evil. Grim's still a melancholy bad luck magnet, Mandy's still defined by her cynicism, and Billy still hollers and gets into trouble without trying to. But in Season 1C, it feels like they were starting to be tested by the world that now surrounded them. Grim can actually feel accomplished, Mandy can be more angered or bewildered, and Billy became a father. That's all you need to know there. Okay, now it's time to praise this show's animation. While the pilot looks pretty close to something you'd see in Cow and Chicken, the show proper fits straight into the other Cartoon Network mold formed by Dexter's Lab and the Powerpuff Girls. Thick-lined geometric shapes reign supreme, and the backgrounds have a vaguely abstract texture to them. In a way, as this show's art style evolved and got cleaner, brighter, and more expressive, it sort of felt like the final evolution of this early Cartoon Network aesthetic, and it left a memorable last impression. By 2003, the animators had gotten very comfortable with casting lights and shadows and throwing in the occasional computer-animated shot to give certain shots more depth and weight. It rarely ever feels flat, which is impressive seeing how easy it is to get that impression from these designs. They'll continue to subtly change next season, getting bigger heads and moving a bit stiffer, save for gross or exaggerated moments. Continuing on to those...
Please pass the egg salad.
Fraggle, Fraggle! Ah! Somebody help me!
To understand the biggest differences between Season 1 and 2, it's apt to know that this is the point by which Evil Con Carne had separated from Billy and Mandy, then died, then had to worm its way back into their show. After making a few cameos in Season 1, General Scar from Evil Con Carne is reintroduced as an uptight, easily bothered neighbor to Billy, and I can't comment on if I liked him in his home show yet, but he's great here. As you could gather, however, Evil Con Carne would start to creep into Billy and Mandy in more ways than one. Originally the more wacky and light-hearted segment on Grim and Evil to balance out the dark tone of the main one, now that it was over, they sort of carried its traits over to Billy and Mandy, to pretty good results at first. While Season 1 was pretty balanced between the main trio, 2 is where they essentially made Billy the unofficial main character. You get way more episodes following him going on zany adventures, which are so far so good. Only a little longer to accommodate the switch from a 3-segment format to a 2-segment one, which, trust me, makes each episode feel a lot longer than you'd expect. This was the season C.H. Greenblatt joined the writer's staff right before he left SpongeBob, and you can see his sense of humor fill out the show. The way he draws characters and pays off jokes is becoming a bigger part of this show's comedic identity. The characters haven't changed too drastically yet. The one who gets it the hardest is Harold, who's now evolved into an adult version of Billy, making him a bit less unique and versatile. At the same time, it's easier to squeeze some jokes out of him, so there was a use to this change. In terms of new characters, this is the season that gave us the Boogeyman, another adversary of Grimm's, who fears he isn't hip and scary with the new generation. He makes for a funny rival at times, and at that, this is the funniest season of the show, so if that's what you want, Season 2 is vital viewing.
You know, Mandy, I was scared you never ever wanted to talk to me again. Pretty silly, huh?
I believe Season 3 is the turning point when it comes to the quality of the show. I mostly enjoyed my time with the first 2, but from this point onward, I'm more mixed. There's some stuff I still really like, and other things that I can only hope others find more enjoyment in than
I'll
me.
take the chicken.
I think the biggest problem is just how Billy focused the show has gotten, and how they're only really interested in how stupid and loud they can make him. I mean, he was already at the upper limit of your average viewer's tolerance threshold, but now it gets pretty tiring, and he gets less relatable as he turns into more of a joke dispenser. This is also the season where they start to amp up the gross out, namely the toilet humor. There were some gross moments in the early seasons, but the point was still to be dark and weird, not outright crude. But starting here, there's a fart sound in nearly every episode, and all sorts of unclean imagery. It's one of the few shows where you feel you have to keep a window open when you watch it. It messes with your senses so bad. I can get why Maxwell Adams was told by an executive that it had become a quote, hateful fart cartoon, even if I don't think having a mean sense of humor immediately makes a show hateful. One positive change was the use of more fourth wall breaks and references to other Cartoon Network shows. Every season of Billy and Mandy aired under Cartoon Network City branding in some capacity, and it fits snug into that era where these shows were encouraged to be referential and take advantage of their big home. And the fourth wall breaks are usually pretty clever for the time, even if after seeing Chowder, there's just no way any other show can live up to that. This is also where they started to get a better grasp of Owen's personality, what makes him happy, what scares him, what makes him happy, what his family's like. This is the beginning of his slow overtaking of the show, which I don't mind at all.
It's the Fluffy Cat!
Oh, great. Another stinking episode about pets. That's it. I'm out of this cartoon. Let me know how it goes.
You know it's a good sign when one of the characters expresses their boredom with a type of episode. At least they knew certain stories were getting old and searched for new things to do. Some of the setups are very unconventional, like a zipper that can remove heads, and others are things you've seen 100 other cartoons do. Scythe needs repairs, get new Scythe evil, the moral of the story is don't die. A few more characters are introduced here, including a retirement home full of retired horror monsters from yestercentury. The breakout star in this place is Dracula, a semi-Mr. T parody who speaks in the first person. I'd call him Blackula, but Simpsons did it. He was a pretty welcome addition to the cast, forming a complicated resentment for Grimm, so it's always neat to see them bump into each other. The Christmas special is also here. If you ever wanted to hear Gilbert Gottfried as Santa Claus, now's your chance. But as it stands, Season 4 is a minor improvement over 3. The plots are more interesting, the comedy's more comfortable with being completely mindless, but I guess no season's born cool. Except of course.
Thank you for being a friend. Travel down the road.
Listen to all the evidence Was that an aside?
I bet many of you are expecting me to be pretty negative towards Fred Fredburger. Well, too bad. I don't mind him in theory. As a comic foil to the denizens of the underworld having no ability to read the room, he can be fine in small doses. Not so much when entire episodes are dedicated to him, much less so when his identity is converted into the branding of Cartoon Network. City Bump is still played in this era, of course, but I don't blame people who associate this big squishy face with the beginning of the end of classic Cartoon Network. I just think he's a character the writers got too trigger happy with and expected him to be a bigger hit with kids than he actually was. He really did nothing to save the show from further declining because season 5 is easily my least favorite. The writing felt especially weak this year, with the characters being stripped down to their most basic or unlikable forms just so the stories can work. And it usually takes a pretty long time before anything interesting happens in them, like they're prepping you for a big climax when the big climax could have been the whole episode. And there are many, many more self-deprecating jokes about how dumb the show is and how incompetent or ugly their writers must be.
My life is in the hands of this guy. It's like I'm in some bad cartoon.
Who writes this stuff anyway?
I hate retro cartoons!
It counts because it's retro now. If they made fun of themselves less often, I'd get less of a sense that they were running out of ideas and not very proud of the season's offerings. I'm kinda happy that the show's on my wavelength again, but it shouldn't be like this.
Oh, that wasn't so bad.
Season 6 was a little better than 5, and found a way to leave the show on a more pleasant note than I was expecting. It isn't consistently good. I think with Billy having gotten this dumb and destructive, and Mandy having gotten this mercifully evil, they're too far gone, but there were signs they wanted to improve the writing again. They love to find a weird and often unhinged way to end the story, injecting a bit more eeriness and uncertainty into the world again. It doesn't always work from a storytelling perspective, but if they wanted to make the audience feel confused again, so be it. But I have to say, I was finding it difficult to trust some episodes by the title alone. King Tootin' Pootin' did not sound appealing to me, but it was a pretty alright mummy story with a devilish ending. My expectations for the show had fallen rather low, so it was smart of season 6 to push them even lower, then find ways to keep surprising me. What a lot of people don't know is that this is the first and only full season of this show, or any cartoon for that matter, to be produced in widescreen and high definition. If you ever thought some shots looked smushed and that there was information on the sides of the frame you were missing, that's why. It wasn't a perfect switchover, but like other HD cartoons, at least it gives it more shelf life for future reruns ever since widescreen became the standard. Fittingly enough, Season 6 is home to no less than 6 specials, a shocking amount for what was yet another 13-episode order, even though most of them aren't listed as part of the show's episodic production run. You've got Company Holt, a reunion for the cast of Evil Con Carne, the big boogie adventure movie where Grim and the Boogeyman race through the underworld to stay scary while Number 3 becomes responsible for an unknown number of deaths. Billy and Mandy Moon the Moon, their slice in the CNN Invaded event, where for some reason they brought Spurg along and formed a dairy-themed superhero team. It makes sense in the context of the event. Wrath of the Spider Queen, a two-parter that looks into the backstory of Grimm's relationship with the Queen of Spiders and the Boogeyman in high school. Also some drama between Billy and Jeff, banter between Mandy and Mindy, but none of that's given as much attention in this epic but clogged two-parter. The Grim Adventures of the K&D, a crossover with Codename Kids Next Door that I can see more appeal in now than when I was reviewing that show, but it's still pretty farcical and more of a Billy and Mandy episode than a Kids Next Door one in story and tone. And finally, Underfist Halloween Bash, a backdoor pilot for a spin-off involving the side characters in this supernatural evil-stopping organization. It's fun, but a bit too reliant on the world established for the last show to be its own thing. I didn't like all of these, but it was nice of Cartoon Network to give them so many chances to do something big and impactful to close out the show. It may have only been branded as its own show for 4 years, but the franchise was technically around for 7 or 8. I don't think of it as one of the most iconic Cartoon Network shows, but it's stuck around long enough for that to be the case for some people, and I would be happy if episodes like these 14 were what they remembered. Beasts and Barbarians thrusts us into a fantastically ominous castle, but it isn't long before it's revealed to not be completely authentic. All the better to portray Billy and Erwin as village jesters, and the Golem parody would have been very fresh and welcome. Dream a Little Dream involves the trio eating some really old leftovers, then they make like sleepers and shut their peepers. Predictably, they each have a weird dream, and I had the most fun watching Grimm's. This isn't counting towards the clone video though. The Secret Snake Club is one I could see a couple people hating due to how slow, tedious, and anticlimactic it is, but I really like the laid-back vibe of just hanging out with a dorky fraternity that poses as little of a threat as possible, whilst Billy's off on a more brief and exciting adventure that you don't need to think too hard about. Here, There Be Dwarves takes a long time, and I mean a long time to get going, but it's worth it for this battle between dwarves and elves over the right to be associated with a certain product we don't have in my country, so it's a total work of fantasy to me. Sister Grimm felt like a designated nice episode, where Grimm gets mistaken for a nun and becomes the children's new favorite. This little posse is cute and fairly loyal, and keep the relationship from feeling one-sided. Homer the Ancients introduced Dracula. Well, that was easy to recap. Toadblatt's School of Sorcery is a great parody of the Philosopher's Stone. There's no philosophy, but it's still stones, with its lampooning of high fantasy and the grievances with boarding schools. Good Bling and the Hippopotamus is such a ridiculously huge groaner that it wraps back around to being brilliant. The principal Good Vibes is now a gangster rapper a decade out of his element and has turned the school into total anarchy, and it's up to Owen's grandma to reappropriate the culture we've appropriated from her. Son of Nurgle is the introduction of Junior, and well, that sealed the deal for me. I really like how the Wintercap setting makes all the events feel literally more chilling, and you still get the sense that Junior's a shy kid who isn't in the right place. Nigel Planter and the Chamber Pot of Secrets is a much snappier Potter parody, notably introducing the character of Lord Moldybutt, whose name is so cursed it causes slapstick every time it's uttered. Hilarity ensues. Wishbones does as much as it can in 22 minutes. The gang find a wish-granting skull called Thromnambula, but all of his wishes come with a price. Not that any of his 9 victims seem to learn. Every single wish had a different set of writers, giving the special an amazing sense of variety. Who Killed Who starts with Billy and Ermin playing Cluedo outside for some reason, but gets much more mysterious. Mandy befriends an old lady who claims to have beaten Grimm at something, and she and her house give off so much dark personality, it's exquisite. Little Rock of Horror's source of parody should be fairly obvious. It's far more alien, and only has room for one song, but it's a dang catchy one. It's a very easy episode to just put on and have a good time with, even if a brain-sucking alien isn't something that'll usually lift your spirits. My favorite episode is Nursery Crimes for basically being Shrek. Grimm traps the kids in a fairy tale world that isn't all it seems. They get a lot of humor out of how twisted these stories are behind the cover, and they were more twisted when they were first told, so it makes sense they'd be featured in a show that prioritizes horror, or at least used to before they started making junk like this. El Dia de los Muertos Estúpidos may appeal to Mexicans and people interested in their festives, but I just found the story unlikable and the jokes gross. I didn't need Harold making a tent out of his underwear. Anger Mismanagement puts Grimm and Mandy and Scar in a therapy group with a very unhelpful therapist who wouldn't help anyone in real life. I guess that's part of the joke, but I got no sense of appeal out of him. Be afraid, be very afraid, might be too much Fred. In small bursts, these jokes might be fine, but it's not something that works as an entire episode. Even the SpongeBob reference doesn't do much for me. Just the two of Parseesburg entering the beautiful world of puberty. I didn't need all the gross imagery in this episode, especially when they aren't even doing anything horror-related with it, just a desensitizing dose of exaggeration. Scary Poppins was the point where they took Mandy's sinister nature too far. It's not funny enough to just treat her like an eldritch demon. Then they pit her against this Super Nanny parody, and there is just no joy in this romp, only cynicism. Super Zero puts Billy on a planet as a superhero. That's the setup. It's just a vehicle for Billy to be on his own doing stupid things. It's not like he's designed to bounce off smarter characters or anything. Waking Nightmare gives us a pretty overloaded iteration of Billy, one who's loud, dumb, and malicious, trying to ruin Mandy's beauty sleep. Wasn't he supposed to at least be the well-meaning and optimistic one? I think his character falls apart when the only consistency is having no brain. Case in point, Everything Breaks, where he has no role in the story other than to break things. The plot doesn't even kick in until a little under halfway through, and it's still all about Billy causing untold property damage. And finally, the problem with Billy seems like it'll explain something about who he is, but all we get is him and Harold racing around using their butt propellers and annoying everyone around them. This feels like it was designed to appeal to my polar opposite. I don't like anything about this episode. But in conclusion, I was surprised by how much I'd warmed up to the show. I don't just get the appeal, I think it appeals to me. It's a more cynical and morbid cartoon than you'd be used to in this era, but that can work in its favor. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy is funny, atmospheric, and full of character, so I can see why it has such a devoted fan base who quote it as regularly as The Simpsons or SpongeBob. Although my newfound appreciation only really extends to the first 2 seasons. I don't hate the later ones like I did when I was younger, but they're more mixed to me. For that reason, my exact opinion on this show may fluctuate as time goes on, but for now, sure, I can watch it without dying.
Ben 10 Alien Force is coming up next.
Thanks, Kevin.
This is the end. Smash your television.